Hello, and welcome to Movies We Dig, the podcast about film, antiquity, and everything in between. I'm Colin McCormick.
I'm Elijah Fleming.
And I'm Christy Vogler.
And today we're digging up The Sandman, a 2022 American fantasy drama Netflix series based on the 1989 to 1996 comic book run written by Neil Gaiman and published by DC Comics. And we have two also special announcements. One is that for the first time, everybody in the room is a doctor. Congratulations, Dr. Fleming. Yeah. Woo. And our second major announcement is now this for our first episode of what is sort of tentatively our third season, although we're very informal about that / unprofessional. Joining us today is a super special guest, Dr. Kira Jones. You might know her if you're active on Twitter and sort of the Classics Twitterverse. Welcome, Kira. We're really glad to have you.
Great. Thank you. I am super excited to be here.
And we'll just start off with our regular, we're a little rusty, but we're going to shake off the cobwebs. And we'll start with just our regular question. Kira, did you dig this series?
Oh my God, yes. So much. So much.
I was a little bit nervous for this episode because sometimes the hardest stuff to talk about is the stuff we like, because we just kind of end up going in a circle being like, yeah, I thought it was great. I loved it. And then like it's easier to dig into like, you know, the stuff we don't like because there's so much I can kind of sink my claws into. So I'm looking at my cat, so I'm just running with cat metaphors. And I just watched the Calliope episode. But so Kira, had you read the comics before seeing it? Are you a Gaiman fan at all? What's your sort of history with this series?
Yes to all of the above. I have read the graphic novel, seen the show, big fan of Gaiman's work in general. I love American Gods. It's one of my favorite books. Another great show also. And I think he's probably one of the best Lovecraftian style writers around. His short stories are really, really good. And of course, I mean, he's super into mythology, which I am as well. And he knows his stuff. So it's always a plus.
Yeah. And this is... its connection to, I guess, classical antiquity or ancient Mediterranean, it's there, but it's one piece among many. But really, I think what I was sort of interested in talking about is really this Neil Gaiman and this show's particular relationship to like myth and particularly the process of adapting myth. But I'll just go around the room. Dr. Fleming, what do you think? We're all doctors here, but I'm just going to remind Eli of it.
Thank you, Colin.
Okay.
I read the first volume of the graphic novel way back, like in college, like when I read Watchmen at the same time. It was like a phase that I went through. And I wish that I'd kept going and that I'd read more of the volumes, because now I think I would like it more now. It was just sort of on the list of like, okay, that was cool. And it didn't super stick out to me, but I adored this show. This was so much fun. And I think I saw so many tweets that was like, no thoughts, just vibes, just Sandman vibes. And I'm like, yes, that is how I feel. It's like, it's not necessarily that there's a plot that I need to follow. It's just the atmosphere and the vibes.
And also the vibes of like a My Chemical Romance concert circa like 2009, like when he comes out, when Tom Sturridge comes out and he's got like the waxen face and the hair, and I was like, yes. But
yes, it's like, it's my little high school heart is beating very, very fast for this. Yes. So yeah, I think I also dug this quite a lot. But I think, Christy, you were also a big fan of the comics, right?
Actually, I have not technically read the comics, but I love the DC universe. And so I didn't quite connect right away that it was connected to DC until Constantine showed up, but it was a woman. And I'm like, Constantine? And they're like, an exorcist / magician. It's like, this is a lot like DC. And I'm like, wait a minute. Yeah, so I enjoyed that. And it was very much coming at the show, I guess, just with not knowing the comic background for once for me, which was interesting. Was really cool because it didn't feel steeped in DC. I think the comics are a little bit different. They start pretty connected to the DC universe, and this one was just a world of its own that still felt nostalgic and familiar, which was really cool. And my vibing is especially like Morpheus through the ages when he's visiting with the one person.
Yeah, I want to talk about the Hob episode. That might be my favorite. But on the note, because yeah, this was published originally as a DC comic, and in the original run, it had a lot of like DC characters, like Scarecrow shows up, and I think one part Martian Manhunter has like kind of a cameo, and so lots of changes that sort of happened between graphic novel and show, and some of them were for the medium, which we can get into, but some of them I think were just licensing issues, right? Because like you can't,
Sure.
if which characters certain parties have the rights to and things, like if you're going to have Scarecrow or Martian Manhunter, that opens up a whole like legal, the getting into like the rights battles and rights histories of comic books is a fascinating subtopic in and of itself that I could go off on. But yeah, actually, so maybe we can just start right there with just this. I think like both textually and metatextually, this is really kind of a work about, well, it's a work about a lot of things, but I want to talk about like this as a work of adaptation, and particularly as it relates to like myth, because when many of us sort of talk about or teach or lecture or whatever on mythology, one of the things that I like to really sort of hammer down is that mythology is really just a long history of adaptations. And so just our thoughts about like the show's approach to adaptation, the things it changes or what it thinks about, and even just the idea of like myth making in general.
That was like a really big question, Colin. That wasn't
Yeah,
really a
I don't pull my
question.
punches. We go right for the juggler.
I kind of liked that there wasn't an overarching, like there kind of was like the big storyline, I guess, that kind of does get wrapped up kind of in the last episode, the 10th
Mhm.
episode, not the extra
Yeah.
episode. But for a while, it's like it feels like the story is going in a bunch of different directions. And like I feel like they could have continued on in a lot of different stories. Like nothing felt super closed. And I think that feels to me quite a lot like Ovid or something, where it's like there are bits and pieces that are jutting out from the center tree, and they all have like these main themes that might connect them, or similar characters or people that pop up, but they're not necessarily all following the same narrative arc.
Mhm.
And so, just as a work of like mythology, I thought this worked really well in that vibe.
Yeah, I am. I definitely agree with that. And one of the things I noticed as I was rereading the comics is that, this is a show that manages to be incredibly faithful to the source material, but also be radically different in a lot of super interesting ways. So, like, we've got the DC characters in there. We've got Joanna Constantine now. We have a bunch of gender flips, race flips, and they all work perfectly.
Mhm.
I mean, Death is probably my favorite casting ever.
I loved.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kirby Howell Baptiste just nails it, absolutely nails it. And then you've got David Thewlis as John Dee, who should be Dr. Destiny. Absolute 360 from the comics.
Mhm.
In the comics, they have him as this desiccated, mummy guy who wants to actually rule the world. And then, we get John Dee in the show who has been corrupted by this ruby, is probably not an Arkham. I don't think we ever really find out what that kind of corporate looking building is.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
just in some like private basement prison in Buffalo.
Yeah. And then, like, his whole thing is that he hates people lying to him,
Mhm.
which, again, completely different from the graphic novel. And I think what really works well with those changes is, something that we see a lot in mythological adaptations as well. You've got those core elements. You've got Morpheus here. He's the Dream Lord. You've got him interfacing with humanity. But like so many adaptations, there's a different kind of moral. There's a different theme that the showrunners want to get across. And I'm not entirely sold on this, like 99% sold, but I really think that what Gaiman and the other writers want to talk about this time is kind of the nature of humanity. It's
Mhm.
not as black and white, good and evil as we see in the graphic novel. I mean, John Dee, for example, he's got all of this trauma.
Mm-hmm.
He's got all of these psychological issues. He is very childish
Yeah.
and childlike in a number of ways. But we've also got Morpheus, who goes from being very standoffish. And can I just say that Tom Sturridge's ability to convey emotion without actually moving his face is remarkable.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I did not know how they were gonna do that with Morpheus because like in the comics he's either like deadpan or deadpan and angry. You know, it's there's two Morpheus modes in the comics, but Tom Sturridge really just turns that into humanity beautifully, and the way that he kind of uses that very minimalistic sort of expression to convey his new opinions about humanity throughout the series and how his understanding is evolving. I think is also one of the big themes that ties in with the whole, are humans, afraid? Are they selfish? Are they worth saving?
Yeah.
Really?
And this is just kind of like just the question of even medium, like the problems with adapting for the medium, right? Because there's so many things about Sandman that Sandman. There's been attempts to adapt Sandman over the last 30 something years. There's one in particular I want to talk about, but we'll get to it later. But there are strengths to there's some things that are difficult because people are wondering like, how do you do this or how would you do this? But then there's also strengths to bringing it into live action. And I feel like we often complain, particularly with things like mythology, where like we find that animation or drawing tends to really lend itself to the fantastic in that. But in this case, like exactly here was saying, like the way that you can get emotion out of an actor, the way you can't necessarily get out of just the way Morpheus is drawn on the page, or just the other dimension, and even just the sort of the softening or the humanity that the show is bringing to these characters. Like John Dee, like one of the big changes, again, spoilers, is in the comic, John Dee murders Rose. No, not Rose.
Rosemary.
Sorry, Rosemary. Sorry, not Rose. Rosemary, the Good Samaritan who picks him up, and then in the show he gives her the amulet of protection, and it kind of softens it. But then that's a great sort of setup because the very next episode is the infamous 24/7 the diner one, which even just his the idea of the central conflict to my mind there is Dee's struggle is really just with myth. Like Dee doesn't like myths, right? Because he sees them as lies, and this idea of dreams or myths, I'm kind of using them a little fluidly, are lies that we tell it, we delude or obscure or something like that. Whereas Gaiman, just through his whole oeuvre, is a very pro myth person, right? And like believes in like the power of myths, dreaming, literature, art, etc., etc.
There was something very meta, especially this conversation about like how this is about humanity, and that's what I really liked about the episode with Death, is that Morpheus is felt like he's lost his purpose, he's lost this, he's completed this quest, and it was kind of exciting because he had something to do for once and had forgotten his original purpose. And it was kind of the recognition that Death is like, our purpose is to serve humans, and he's kind of relearned that. But in doing so, that's when it doesn't look like he's changed, it doesn't seem like his behavior has changed over much, but it is a significant change that is noted upon by people who have known him for a very long time. And I feel like sometimes that is our idea of myth and adaptation, where like, for a long time, and where this podcast could have been, is just like, here is the myth and here is how they deviated from it and therefore got it wrong. And it ignores the whole point of myth is to continue to evolve and reflect the society from which it's told. And Neil Gaiman has done that beautifully, and the showrunners here did it beautifully.
Not to like throw shade on a fandom, but I'm about to. But like, this is a problem. This is one of my big umbrages I take with like particularly like Lord of the Rings fandoms, which get really invested in like the canon of the work, or the idea of Tolkien as some kind of prophet, or like he is the voice of God, and then this text is scripture and we cannot change. And maybe there's a whole other thesis I'm thinking of Judeo-Christian religion and its influence on our ideas about like canon, orthodox and heterodox, whatever. But like where that fandom in particular, at least to me, gets really obsessed of like they really want like a good adaptation would be a very, very true to the original material adaptation, which, like Christy's just saying, it is like misses the point of storytelling sort of at large that Gaiman, I think really understands very, very deeply and very like empathetically.
So on like the line of storytelling, do you guys have a favorite episode that you like could pull out from the show?
Or like yeah.
I knew what yours was, Colin.
Yeah, no, that's correct. No notes.
On the comic side, like a favorite, I guess, character interaction that has sort of come through.
I'll continue with my Death one, because I think that besides the Calliope storyline, ended up being my favorite because I also thought it was a really interesting discussion about our like humanity's relationship with death. In that, like, it's a pretty terrible one nowadays. Like, we try to remove ourselves so much from death, and this was such a beautiful representation. And like, it was really hard to watch because sometimes it was really beautiful and it felt complete with the very first person they visit who playing the violin, and he just wants a moment to say his prayer and then go on. And then you go later to the infant in the cradle and death just saying, I know it was too short, but it's time to go now. Like, it was so heartbreaking to watch, and but it was so inevitable and soft. I loved that portrayal because it was meant to show that like death is necessary and death isn't a horrifying thing that we should be running from, that we should be trying to trap into a little glass bubble and all of this.
Kira, favorite episode?
You're gonna make me pick one. Jeez.
I mean,
Yep.
you can hedge or pick a couple. That's fine. There's no wrong answer.
I mean, the death episode is definitely up there. It's just so beautifully done. And, I agree with everything that you said, Christy.
You can say the diner episode, be like, because I'm a sicko.
I mean, Calliope was also a favorite. And my personal hot take is that since the actress was the same person who did the voice acting for Cassandra in AC Odyssey, this is totally a crossover we can make.
Mm-hmm.
So, yep.
We're going to apply the, was it the Amy Pistone logic of canon, which is if an actor is in one thing and another thing, then both things are a shared universe.
Yes.
Ergo,
Yeah,
the
totally.
Mummy and the Fast and the Furious movies are in a shared universe.
Yep. Yeah, I can go with that. That works for me. But yeah, I guess if I had to pick like a favorite, I really liked the Hell episode.
Okay, me too.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Lucifer.
Okay, because I think Lucifer is maybe my favorite, like, character interaction, and I love that, like, it's the wizard's duel from The Sword and the Stone, where they're like battling each other in these like, weird forces of nature, and I love it so much. And I adore Gwendolyn Christie as Lucifer. She was so
brilliant.
particular, and like the way that it was beautiful. No words.
Although, like, I liked how like all of her like curls were like perfectly formed on her head, like in the way like you'd see in like a statue.
Yeah, it's like she walked out of like a Raphael painting or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. She's like a Bernini come to life.
Yes.
Yeah.
I learned that the original art, so Death in the sort of Lucifer in the comic is kind of androgynous. Is actually modeled after early David Bowie with like kind of the perm or something like that. So if you look,
oh well.
And I think he commented on like pronouns too. It's like Lucifer's preferred pronouns are we.
the royal we.
The royal we.
And I'm like, that checks out. That checks out.
Yeah.
I loved how even just standing still, she looked so imposing, or it looked like that painting, or it was like the image right out of the comic book. It was just like that very scary but like very particular image of those wings was so perfect.
Or even in like the very first, what's the demon, Squatter Bloat or something like that, when that guy shows up,
supposed to be Erdogan, and I'm like, oh, I know that reference. Okay.
I love the rhyming demon.
Yes.
Yeah, and the idea like that first cave, like the whole like the entrance to hell is just like made out of people. It's very, very Dante.
Yes, for sure.
Kind of going back to the comment, because we have said this before, and Colin brought it up again, where we, visually, especially for Greek myth, sometimes it seems animation is a better way to go to get off these fantastical elements without looking corny or cheesy. And it's like, props to this, because, and that's just it. You don't necessarily need a bunch of really cool special effects to like have these personifications feel larger than life in a lot of ways. So I was really impressed with that. Like, even probably the fight with Lucifer was the most impressive in terms of like, oh, they're like duking it out, but it's in such a understated way at the same time.
Yeah, if I can say, I like this version so much better than the one in the novel. The one in the novel, it was, almost understated in a way, and this just like blew everything into epic proportion.
Yeah, as it was happening, I was sitting and watching. I'm like, and like Eli said, I'm like, oh, it's the wizard duel from Sword in the Stone, and yet you going from it's like snake to horse or like wolf, hunter, snake, falcon, bacteria, life, and then it's like how do you beat anti-life? And he's like dreams, mother. But again, like we're falling to the trap that I was afraid of just being like, yeah, love it, great, no
Love it,
notes.
love it. Well, I think as we're talking about it, I'm thinking about how that sort of even ties into the Calliope episode of the thing that can beat anti-life is this hope that we have and like this hope for the future. And at the very end, Calliope was like, no, I have to forgive him because like how else am I supposed to move on like and have any sort of future after this? And so I think there's so much of forward looking that
Yeah.
happens in this show that I think is kind of beautiful in a really touching way and something that I haven't seen in a lot of the very, very cynical and perhaps appropriate like media that has also been recently coming out. But it's dark, but it's not
It's not pessimistic.
despair. Yeah. It's like we see despair, but she doesn't take up a lot of screen time, I guess.
And even though like we sort of said, some of the episodes are part of maybe a larger kind of narrative structure, and some of them are like the death or the hobgoblin or the calliope or just kind of little bottle episodes that can exist on their own, but they're all like thematically closely linked because they're all about one like storytelling, but also this idea of change and even forgive. Like so much of what dreams process is forgiving people. And Calliope says like 1,000 years ago you would have you wouldn't have even looked twice or helped or this like death is growing from his experiences, as are other characters. And like Galt is the perfect example, which was a new invention, and this is I think a great case of where an adaptation can really go beyond above and beyond the original material. Well, Galt is kind of a new addition, but the sort of the themes going around with that, can a nightmare be more than a nightmare? Maybe I want to be a good dream or something like that. Can I bring happiness into the world? And an older version of Morpheus would have been like, no, you're a nightmare and you either be your nightmare or you get deleted. And, reformed Morpheus is like, we can change.
I guess that brings me to a question I did have, because the one kind of ending that I don't know if I was completely satisfied with, and I don't know that it's an ending for sure at this point, is the Corinthian, in terms of he's kind of shown to be the very first antagonist, and like this is who Morpheus was out to go deal with, and he's become problematic in the human world. And then the leap to him being like, I was really thrown when Bowling Green made the comments like, oh, and he's got this cult of followers now. And I'm like, I thought he just showed up at this conference for a bunch of serial killers, and it didn't connect to me that the Corinthian, in his actions in the human world, is what had created this cult of serial killers that have only become very predominant in the last 130 years. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. But then where I lost it was, what exactly was the original intent that Morpheus had created him with? Because there's this idea that nightmares serve a purpose, not to lock us into fear, but to give us a chance to face those fears and grow past them. But it's like, I don't understand what the Corinthian was supposed to be in the original intent then, and how it went so wrong, basically. Ooh, I stumped people.
I know. I'm just like,
I'm just gonna in the editing room. I'm just gonna add in that like the old sound that the dial-up computers would make, like.
I know. I think the Corinthian is such a terrifying bad guy because I mean he's
got teeth for eyes.
Yeah.
No, he looked horrified. I'm like,
If you see interviews with Neil Gaiman, he's very like coyly. Like one of the weirdest things is that Boyd just actually has teeth for eyes. Like normally he has to put these little prosthetics on, but it was perfect for this role because you find a guy with actual teeth for eyes.
No, I mean I feel like that's such a classic just gut reaction jump scare nightmare vision of just like something is terribly wrong with this and like there are things where there shouldn't be, and that's just like I feel like such a human gut reaction of like no. Absolutely not.
It's a case study in the abject.
Yes. And so I wonder when you have like a jump scare basically that tries to become more, and that's sort of how I've always thought about the Corinthian, as this just like thing that people would immediately just be like, oh, no. Trying to sort of think more deeply about his own purpose and maybe going about it in the wrong, well, like the right way for him. Like, it was terrifying and horrible, but like
It's almost like he's almost like an Ultron, or like that kind of classic science fiction trope where they create the thing to do a thing, and its interpretation, or it does the thing so well, or it like brings that its prerogative to like the logical extreme, which is like, no, not like that.
But what is he supposed to do?
To frighten people, right? Or to bring in sort of fear or necessary fear, and he kind of perverted or like, I don't know, maybe Morpheus designed him sort of flawed, and the Corinthian is like, why did you design me flawed, my man? And then but he's like, but I still want to live. He's almost like he's like a Frankenstein's monster in that sort of situation, right?
Yeah.
Where like Corinthian can't help how he's made. So does the fault lie with Corinthian or his creator?
Ooh, Kara might have an answer for us.
All right, I looked it up. So
Sweet.
Thank you to the Sandman wiki for this. According to the wiki, his original design, which was, in the Corinthians' words, I believe, to be a black mirror made to reflect the darkness that humanity could not confront in itself. Dream later recreates him with some changes, so the exact nature of these changes is not explicit.
Okay.
So
I'm gonna stick to my Frankenstein thesis.
Yeah. Well, us
Yeah.
at our worst is serial killers, apparently. Like,
Also, I just got to say, Serial Con. Just like when the minute I saw that was happening, I was like, love it, love that idea so much. Like a convention for serial killers. It's like that. I mean, that's so fun, and like there's different panels, and I was having flashbacks to like conferences and things like that.
Yeah.
And it was like the panel of like there was like the religious serial killers. There was like the gender disparity in the serial killer microcosm.
Yeah, that was terrifying and hilarious. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also like some of the most terrifying characters also in the series are not nightmares or demons or the literal devil. It's Funland, right?
Yeah.
Who's so deeply upsetting and
Or even in the Calliope episode, the Richard Maddock, like he does like horrible things just for fame and glory, basically, and like he's not a nightmare. He's just a regular human being.
yeah. He's almost scary because he is so easy to imagine. Like,
So
that is
easy
someone
to
you could easily
imagine.
run into, and
Yeah.
that is, I mean, I guess maybe we can pivot to the Calliope episode, which is the most sort of overtly in our sort of professional wheelhouse, but the idea of like, your relationship to the muses, right? Because in Greek literature particularly, like usually like a poem will start out with like, the muses came down to me and they bid me to sing this song, and Hesiod being like sort of famously the first to like invoke the muses, and Homer too. They say, Derek Jacobi says outright, he's like, oh, she was Homer's muse, it'd be good enough for you. But the idea of like, yeah, the relationship, like the artist and the relationship to the muse, and also maybe like this is a dark dimension and content warning, but the idea of like artistic creation as like a form of rape that episode is sort of getting into.
Yeah.
The one thing that, I mean, there's a lot to unpack with this episode in particular. We might talk about the kittens too, because that was like the worst part to me, was the kittens scene.
I like had to walk away from my computer.
know.
I was like, I did not think that I was going to be having this many feelings right now.
I had blocked that part out in my memory,
Mm-mm.
so it just caught me off guard.
Yeah.
Like,
No.
yeah. Now I remember this, and I still hate it.
Yeah.
No.
Well, the thing I found interesting is like at one point Calliope seeks out Hecate, who I also love as a character, and how that was done, and how it, like, it's not even just Hecate, it's not just the Fates, it's like any tripartite goddess being that we've come across being all in one, basically, which was really cool.
Yeah, it's the Fates, the Furies, the Norns, the three witches from Macbeth. Like they're all like shifting. I mean, it's very Jungian. These like this archetype of the three women, and I think it's what the maiden, the mother, the crone. Neil Gaiman is super into that, like that archetype.
Well,
Pops up a lot.
I like that it kind of drew this connection that there aren't that many gods, actually. They're all human remembrances and imaginings of like a limited amount of people, and so that brings kind of a universality to all of the stories that are ever told. But okay, going back to where I was, is the fact that they point out that Orpheus, or not Orpheus, also, I feel so stupid that Orpheus and Morpheus connection was like only brought to my attention having
I
watched
wrote it
this.
down. It was a very Aragorn, son of Arathorn moment, where it's like
Yeah.
Orpheus, son of Morpheus.
And I'm like, oh God,
And
really? How did I not see that?
his less talented brother Borpheus.
And their imprisonments, almost for the same amount of time. And I thought it very interesting that Morpheus maintains this stoic silence for all of that time and kind of, doesn't give anything up. What has been given up is just something that's already been physically taken from him, and he can't really do anything about that. But Calliope is also imprisoned and not physically restrained in the way that Morpheus is, but she keeps losing her gift to these men who take it from her. Like the taking is very physically from her. And I thought that was a really interesting gender dynamic playing out right there of two different types of imprisonment and what humanity wants from them and how they go about getting it. I don't know if I have much more to say than that. Then it was like very stark to me how that played out.
And I think we also run into the nature of these rules that keep coming up in the show, like the rules that like not even the endless can get past, and these really, really stupid humans who try and take advantage of that, which I mean we also see in mythology a lot. Humans thinking, oh yeah, I'm gonna get one over on the gods because I'm so smart, and then it completely backfires.
Very satisfyingly too. Like
Yeah.
when his fingers were bleeding and his, all over the walls. It's like, good. Okay.
Yeah, he gets a very karmic punishment, right? Where he has too many ideas. He goes from having no ideas to he's just like I wrote it down in my notes as he has pitch fever. He just can't stop pitching.
But I think it's like there are so many stories of mortals just like stepping on a god's tail or something, and sometimes it's maybe not that warranted, like the reaction that they get. And sometimes it is so satisfying to be like, don't stop being awful, you terrible, terrible humans.
My question, I guess, this temptation, I guess, really about it, like, what if you had a muse? It's a very Faustian kind of thing, and you can see the transgression where at first Richard Maddock is like, this is fucked up, I don't want anything to do with this, but then he's so desperate for the status, the glory, the renown, the recognition, that's the Faustian kind of deal that this episode really deals in.
I think something that was interesting is, there's a mention of like, you're supposed to woo her, and like, but I don't know, this proves more effective in my opinion. And I thought that was a really interesting distinction about how the Greeks definitely viewed these supernatural beings and how other groups did. I actually read for my Roman Civ class a really interesting point of like how early Romans believe that if you do all of these things perfectly correct, you'll make the gods happy and they'll do what you want, as if there's some element that you can control them. And when the Greeks kind of, as a culture, get more introduced to the Romans, they have this very different perception that, these are beings and forces of nature which no one can control. All you can do is just thank them when they're nice to you and then get out of their way when they're not. And it's very reflective in the mythologies too, where like I can't think of a lot of times that a Greek version of the myth is like, oh, I can do something to get a god in my pocket or get this being in my pocket, versus making deals with the fae and like having rules applied to interactions between mortals and immortal beings. They're seen in other mythologies, but it doesn't feel as present in the Greek. The only time you get even something remotely like that is Prometheus tricking Zeus, and it still doesn't work out because Zeus knows the game and lets it play out the way he wants it to play out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could argue that the whole thing with Zeus and the Iliad about how it's fated, I can't intervene.
Yeah.
Or like once I give my word, once I swear on the sticks, I can't go back on that. But that really seems to be much more like God to God interaction rather than God to humanity.
I never thought of it quite that way, and I like that idea that there are these very flexible rules, or that there are only certain situations in which there are like laws that bind things. Like I think Calliope says at some point, like I'm bound by this law, and like
that I didn't
law
make.
that I didn't make, and it's a human invention basically, and law is such like a human thing that's constraining these otherworldly entities. And I think that is such, yeah, back to, I guess, if we had like our own muse or like making that deal. Oh, that's such a wild thought, Colin.
I feel like I would have let her go at the very least. I'm like, and then she's like, then pray to me, as if you're
Yeah,
like,
and
if
I'm
you
like,
do this,
well,
you
that's
think I
how we
won't.
should do it. Like, you're free.
You think like, yeah, you let her go, but then if you let her go, are you still secretly expecting some kind of quid pro quo or something like
Right,
that? Like, what if you
right.
get nothing? Or
Yeah.
and that's the anxiety. My other sort of thought about this episode is about just like, are book parties just when you're a famous author, or is it just everybody holding your book, talking about your book around you while like sipping on their gin martinis? Because, and I also want to talk about Richard Maddock too, as just like the parody of like that pretentious writer guy. Also, actually, this is a question I do want to talk about, the sort of performativeness of that author versus their actual life. Just, the way he kind of, he's so insistent in public about like, we need to, the cast and crew have to be at least 50% women and people of color. And, I
And then
consider myself a
publicize
feminine.
it.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Versus like, oh yeah, by the way, I have a woman trapped in my upstairs bedroom.
Yeah.
Where does the female voice come from? The woman in my life. I'm like, accurate, but
But
Yeah.
also, oh no, that felt very much like a commentary on just life in general, in a very sad and scary kind of way.
And I almost wonder if Richard Mannix is like, not to get too much into like auteur theory or anything like that, but is he like the dark Gaiman? Like, so like in the very beginning, the first thing we see him talking about is about like character comes first. Everything has to stem from character and character decisions, which to me feels like a very Neil Gaiman approach to writing, right? Because so much, I mean, this is a great example, but like so much of his writing is so character focused. I mean, all of these episodes, in a sense, are really revolve around the characters in their lives and choices and things like that. So he seems to be preaching the sort of the Neil Gaiman gospel. But then he's made this sort of dark deal on the side to get his success and his so I don't know, not to like get too much into like it all comes back to the artist, but like, is there some kind of dark relationship between Richard Maddock and Neil Gaiman?
well, it brings me back to the question too of the author who originally had Calliope, but with her still in his possession, he had already fallen out of vogue
Mhm.
basically, and he can't get any of his books, which
Not to pun
were
on your own
is
name, sorry.
I know, which were inspired by a muse, and now they can't get in print. And I'm like, is that kind of, one of these trick gifts where, like, yes,
Mhm.
I give you inspiration, but it's inspiration that will not last the ages, sort of a thing.
Yeah.
And what does that mean then for Maddox, where like he's the big thing right now? And I thought it was interesting that Joe Rowling got
Yeah.
mentioned in that book party of just
Yep.
like, once she's gone and done inserting herself in the creation of the wizarding world, is she going to end up standing the test of time? Because like already with those interactions and her personality, like there's a lot of fallout and people not reading her books anymore because she continues to make it more problematic than it already was.
Right. Yeah. I did sort of think that that was going to kind of come back to bite him sort of in the ass, I guess. When
Yeah.
Richard Maddock has that interview and she's asking him about the other author. She's like,
Yeah,
I think you're,
Erasmus. Yeah.
yeah, I think Erasmus Fry. Like, that's how kind of I see it. And he's like, oh, what? And you could
But
kind
also,
of,
it's very telling that the author he name checks are like Margaret Atwood and
yeah, Octavia Butler. And
Yeah, he's a
yeah.
performative feminist.
absolutely.
He's like the Josh Whedon of the literary world.
Yes. It was a terrifying episode. I like needed to go eat some cookie dough after that. I was like, this is awful.
Kira said this kind of right in the beginning of like a thing that this series is so good at, is that kind of cosmic horror, where like real horror is not necessarily like a guy with eyeballs, or sorry, with mouths for eyeballs. It's like trapping a woman in your bedroom so you can have, be a successful author, or these like sort of dark inner lives, or like,
Or being caught in a lie. being caught in the lie, like that was the most nerve-wracking thing with Rosemary. Is like, okay, she's scared and she's explaining, sometimes we lie because we're scared. And
Right.
but it's like, yeah, I can remember being a little kid, or even like you're kind of trying to get out of trouble and it's like, okay, it's just a white lie and it won't come back to get me, but there's a very strong fear that it will. And it's
Yeah, and maybe not to shift away from Calliope too quickly, but it was just this relationship between lies and dreams and myths, right? Where like they are. I mean, seems very Shakespearean. Where like is acting or art? Is it just a lie? Are actors just liars? I don't know.
Yeah. And we get to see Shakespeare.
Yeah, he's Morpheus inspired, so I think you could definitely make an argument for that.
Absolutely.
Chaucer too.
Yeah. Yeah, which just comes back to that amazing sequence of Hobbes' life, which I love.
Yeah, I like it. That's just fun. But I think also like this is a very sort of mythological take where like in mythology, very often a lot of the sort of mortals who suffer or people who suffer are ones who sort of overly devote themselves to sort of one facet of life or something like that, or get overly attached. So I'm thinking of like, for example, Pentheus in the Bacchae or Hippolytus. I mean, I'm thinking mostly Euripides plays, but like, those are very much about individuals who, whether it's Pentheus is so adamantly against Dionysus or Hippolytus is so adamantly pro Artemis and anti Aphrodite. And D very much fits into kind of, to my mind, like a Hippolytus or a Pentheus figure where he wants the world to be no lies, right? Which on the surface seems like a good idea in the same way that like Pentheus being like no drunk orgies, or Hippolytus being like, I just want to hunt and not get married, and things like that, which seem sort of or noble or logical or make sense at a certain level, but when sort of taken to an extreme, then because then like the whole diner episode is basically like, what if we take this no lie thing sort of to its extreme ends, and everyone's just maddening, and the sort of societal value of like those little white lies that Christy was talking about.
Yeah.
Well, and Morpheus has the same exact problem, right?
Yes. I was going to say, I think there's so much of this is about extremes.
Because he after the guy who imprisoned him dies,
the Magus, Tywin Lannister.
After he dies, the son goes to him. It's like, because he made a mistake. He killed the Raven. And he's like, can you just promise me that you won't hurt anyone if I let you go? And Morpheus remains silent. He can't make that promise because he's so bent on correcting the wrong that was done to him. Someone has to pay. And he could have been free.
And in the comics, the way Morpheus punished it, I think in the show, he gives him eternal sleep, right? And in the comics, he basically gives him like a perpetual nightmare.
Yeah. Which, I'm like seeing all of the extremes now as we've been talking of like the Corinthian is the perpetual nightmare. He's like, one nightmare might be useful, but constant nightmares create serial killers. And like, death is necessary, but like so much death is not gonna help the world. And so like Lucifer and hell is like so much of that. It's like, yes, it's fine in its own borders, and they're trying to grow their borders. It's like all of these extremes. And Calliope and Richard Maddock are like the extremes of greed, or wanting all of these things, and the roads that leads us down. I'm like, this is so cool. Again, I'm on just the circle of this is awesome.
Yeah, and not to bring it back, but I guess now I'm gonna use it to pivot ever so subtly into my favorite episode. But like the extreme of like, what if you could live forever?
Yeah. What if there was no death? What if you just kept going?
Oh, so I love that. It seems like it seems very Neil Gaiman to be like some character, or even very Terry Pratchett-y for some character to be like, I'm just gonna not die. And all of his friends are like, okay, good luck with that. And then it just so happens that an immortal being is overhearing this conversation, and he just doesn't die. And I just love the thing that put that episode over the top for me is when they had that first meeting, and he shows up, and Death's like, so how's it been? And you think it's going to be like, oh, it's like a waking nightmare or something. He's like, it's brilliant. I love living this long. It's fantastic.
I just love like all of the small things that he loves about being human, especially in like from the 1300s to the 1400s. He's like, oh my God, chimneys are awesome. Or like, did you know that we have enough food now? Or like, oh my God, life is crazy. And then even after, I don't know, it's either like 16 or 1700 where he's like lost everything. He's like, I'm at the bottom. The only where like place to go is up. Like I have so much to live for. Like what a wonderful, wonderful thought. I love that.
I love that he's also very invested in his bromance, being like, oh no, the bar is closing and Morpheus didn't show up and I think I messed up and I think he hates me, but I'm gonna go start this bar next door and make sure there's some graffiti that he can find me if he finally, decides that he's gonna stop holding a grudge.
And again, like narratively, that episode has nothing to do with anything, right? It's like a
Nothing at
complete
all.
bottle episode, but like thematically, it's so important because it's Morpheus's, and it ties so well into the episode with Death, where Death is like, no, we're doing this for people, like we work for them in a sort of sense, and like we need to like not lose our attachment to human beings, and like this like particular attachment in Morpheus, just like the growth of Morpheus being like, yes, you are my friend, and I was like, and then my heart burst into 1,000 pieces.
Yes.
Senpai finally noticed him.
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
And that's so interesting because it flips what we would normally think about a very long life. And it does for a time to kind of take the trajectory that we assume it would. We're like, especially because he didn't find a life partner within the first couple 100 years, and it was when he experienced the loss of all of that tragedy, that's kind of the point you expect that you would give up, you would not continue on, you would not want to. And it brings us like, then what is it? Just a certain kind of personality that can persevere no matter what, and Death is okay with this too. It's like, yeah, I guess I'll leave that one alone. And does this not create an existential crisis for Death about like, am I important? Do I matter?
Oh, I think Death is like one of the most quietly confident characters in the entire series.
Yeah.
I mean, she knows what she's there for.
Yeah, she has. It's very almost like it's like dharma, right? It's about like understanding your role, and you can find fulfillment in like understanding your purpose. And Death gets that more than her siblings, right? Because Morpheus kind of struggles. We haven't talked yet about Despair and Desire, the twin. Which one, I love how they're twins, which makes sense sort of thematically.
Yeah.
And just everything about it. We haven't seen that much of them yet, although they're sort of we're building up to more. But this idea of these beings like the endless that they are in the series, that they're kind of like super gods, like in a sort of Hesiod structure. They're like these primordial forces, like night and earth and chaos and darkness and things like that. And so they're all the siblings. So it's like death, dream, despair, desire, destiny,
and destruction, which we haven't gotten to yet. The prodigal.
I do like that they are just the opposite sides of the same coin, basically. And they're so very destructive because they are extremes, right? Like despair is like the saddest sad that you could ever be. And desire is this like this hyper greed, this hyper, want. And I
love that desire lives in a giant statue of themselves
heart.
Inside. Yeah. Fantastic.
So I love it.
Well, for people who've read the comic, I don't care about being spoiled. So, like, where do they start to come in and play more? I think Desire's major role was being the one to create this conundrum of the vortex. And we get hints of a new rule that, like, if one of the Endless kills a family member, then something bad will happen. But we just get hints of that right now.
Kira, I think you're our resident expert.
Oh, that's terrifying. Yeah, so I'm rusty on the second volume because I haven't read it in ages. But, I mean, on the face of it, Desire doesn't really get along that well with Dream, obviously. And, it's very much that kind of sibling relationship where you just want to see them fail. And eventually, I think Desire is going to keep pulling strings in order to kind of like shove Morpheus out of the picture. The Dreamborn baby does come back afterwards, and being born in the realm of Dream turns out to be very consequential. The baby's mother ends up getting involved with fate, and they're not entirely happy with Morpheus either. I don't want to spoil it much more than that.
Oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Yeah, especially since I wouldn't be surprised if they take it in a little bit of a different direction, for the second season of the show, just because that arc fits very well in the graphic novel, but with the trajectory of the show right now, I don't see it fitting quite as well.
Can I follow that up just with why does Desire not like Dream? Because to me, it feels like that's such a strong connection that the things that we dream about are things we desire? And is it because in our dreams we get some semblance of like acquiring the things we desire, or versus like despair you would think would be more antagonistic, or like it's a needed relationship because when you don't get the things you desire, you fall into despair, but things that might pull you out of despair is desiring something more than that, I guess. So I'm really interested in this relationship, this antagonism that exists between dream and desire.
Yeah, I think with Desire, it's that like Dream keeps acting like an older sibling. Like, okay, I'm older than you, I know better. And Desire was like, but I'm Desire, baby. I mean, where are dreams without desire?
Yeah.
Like, there's that lack of respect that Desire is really, really craving. They just keep like throwing obstacles up in front of Dream in the hopes that like maybe one of those isn't going to stick, and get they'll get rid of some hubris that way.
Yeah, or not to get like Freudian on it. I think I'll say, yeah, not to get too Freud, but like it's maybe a contrast between, or conflict between, like our waking and our subconscious desires or something like that, and like which goes where, and like is there actually like what we in our conscious daily lives say, think what we say or think we want, and then versus like what our dreams tell us, what do we really want. And this is almost like the plot of like Inception, right? Where it's like, what do we want him to dissolve the company, but like we have to get to the underlying subconscious desire of like this want, which is like, I want to be a different man from my father or something like that, right? Just like, yeah, the intertangled relationship between, it's all very Hesiod-esque, where it's like these things are born out of other things, and just like there's sleep, and then it's sun, sleep's children, dreams, and night and death and sleep, and it all gets very kind of tangled. But sorry, Eli, you're about to say something.
No, I was gonna say it all seems very like human. It's like, the endless are these big primordial like forces, but then they have these like sibling squabbles, right? And that is so very human in so many ways. And I think that really mirrors so much mythology of like, gods and goddesses who are these, not all powerful, but extremely powerful forces, but like hold grudges and are assholes and just do shitty things. And like, yeah, Dream and Desire just having a sibling spat and like not being able to overcome their, feelings about each other in their own familial relationship for like the betterment of the world is so very human. And I can't, it makes me laugh. I think that is the perfect kind of conflict for these forces to have. It works so well.
I do like the premise that exists in a lot of stories where like the world as we know it is because we've reached this kind of, I don't know if balance is the right word, but like just a particular mixture of all of these forces like set in a particular hierarchy, but like it hasn't always been the case. And so like bad things have happened. And the cat, I think that's where the cat episode comes back in, where like it can be a completely different world, and we're just not cognizant of it at all because our consciousness creates the beings as they are right now.
And that's like Dream's kind of little speech to, by the way, that the cat prophet is Sandra Oh, and that cast, if you read through the cat list of the cat list, is stacked. Like James McAvoy, I think Neil Gaiman is the Crow.
Yeah,
there's all sorts of, it's a very, like the whole cast of this entire show is pretty stacked. Like what Dream says to the cat, where it's basically, it's not just that they like dreamed that they were on top, it's like they dreamed of a world in which they were always on top. And like that's like the sort of power of dream, that like you can just literally, you can't just like rewrite your current state, you can like rewrite all of history and creation with a powerful dream. But then also the subplot of that cats just dream about eating us, and I like definitely looked over to my cat and I was like, he probably does.
Well, and I liked the idea too that it's like the requirement for the humans to gain that world was only 1,000 humans had to dream that to believe, like, and believe it. And so, and that was kind of the premise of the cats going away afterwards, is like a lot of them are still kind of dubious about the whole notion. It's only the little kitten who's like, I believe I'm going to eat a human. And,
I also just like the idea is like I'd be really impressed if someone got 1,000 cats to do anything together.
Yeah, to do anything at the same time. And I'm like,
can't you say that about humans too, though? Like coming to all firmly share such one strong belief that it changes the entire world.
I mean, we're pretty good at cults.
I mean,
yeah,
it's happened a few times.
Yeah.
that's true. That's true.
People have definitely believed new world orders into existence for
That's
sure.
sad but true. Yes.
And it exists in their, like, I mean, think about it. They have convinced themselves of that to the point, like, they'll bring about their own apocalypse, basically.
Mhm.
I do have to say that I think anyone who has lived with a Siamese cat will recognize that Siamese is the perfect breed to go around telling everyone else what to do.
I feel like this is the most philosophical conversation we've had in a long time. Like we talk about all the time how, you know, the movies and media, the way we retell the story is like telling something about ourselves today and how we reproduce it. But like this one's more like, but humanity,
But humanity.
taking it to a whole new level.
All right. There was just a couple little like fun fact stuff I kind of wanted to get into, unless we haven't had any more deep, big questions. Let me see if I have any other big questions I want to hit people with.
Yeah, no, I asked all my the Corinthian and
I like the Corinthian of, is it a biblical thing? Or do you just like leather?
This is what I wanted to bring up. Is like they ask him all those questions, and he's like, all of the above. Like I don't like what. Like this is not the point.
It is kind of interesting. Yeah, like he's the Corinthian, but like, what does that like mean,
What
right?
does it mean?
is it something with Paul?
Yeah,
Right. I think
it's about the biblical city of Corinth. Like, what are you? What?
I think as an academic, I felt very called out by that scene.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Maybe I have one other question. It's like, what is the meaning of mouths as eyeballs?
I swear, it's just scary. This is my theory.
I have two thoughts. One is kind of basically just with Eli, because like it's like a classic, like in, if you think about what is abject or what's horrifying, it's like things being where they shouldn't be, and very often things having to do with the body. So like stuff coming in or going out of the body in ways it shouldn't come in or go out of the body, and body parts being not where they should, and particularly like a lot of abject stuff has to do with like openings. So like
And
perforations.
Things
Yeah,
in your
and-
face. Yes.
Exactly. And so like like mouths for eyes like hits all of that, it's so unsettling
Yes.
for all of the above reasons.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my sort of my headier academic it has to do with like, again, kind of a Frankenstein interpretation where like, does the Corinthian want to be human or have human experiences? And so he eats people's eyeballs with his own eyes to like see the world through there. Like he can only live vicariously through his victims. He can't really experience anything himself.
That was kind of what I was trying, or like how we, and I think the extra component with it is when he puts on those very thick dark glasses. Like, you know, I think of Daredevil, and it's like someone who's blind and like wears those glasses, and so the blindness element of it as well, where if all we have is our mouth to speak and communicate with, and we like just do that to our eyes as well, we've lost out on some aspect of connection between us.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I tend to go a little bit more in the direction of his victims, since they're all young gay men. And you get that idea of like the eyes as, you know, the window to the soul. And he's seeing them, you know, as they are, like as their sexuality, you know, he's ostensibly accepting them for that, and then he's like devouring it. Almost. And I mean, personally, I have a very hard time not relating it to the AIDS epidemic.
Sure.
Although, I mean, these days you could put, you know, any other kind of, you know, anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric in place there, and it still works.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's that idea of him, just like you think that you're going to have this connection with him, and then he takes off the glasses and he's just there to consume you.
Yeah.
You know, and there's nothing left after that.
Yeah. And so much of his power or his deadliness, or, you know, and if we think of him as almost like some kind of predator, is like his allure, like people are kind of instantly attracted to him when they meet him. He has this kind of magnetism to it, which is how and again, there are serial killers that have kind of, or purportedly have that sort of charismatic.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That charisma that draws in their victims. And so like he is almost, he's like the serial killer in that sense. Which is another, like I think Christy mentioned of something, just an interesting fact of like just the phenomenon of serial killers is a very modern thing.
Yeah, that's what I thought was interesting, was this premise that, like, you know, he'd been around for 130 years, and like all of a sudden you have this huge collective of serial killers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My oh gosh, where was it? My other thought with the Corinthian, that what horrified me was the moments he could show restraint, because he goes to the vortex. I'm blanking on her real name right now.
Rose.
Rose.
Yeah.
Oh, there is a Rose and a Rosemary. No wonder
There's a
I'm
Rosemary
confused.
and a Rose.
Okay, so goes to Rose's house and like hooks up with her roommate,
Mhm.
but like doesn't get the information, so like leaves him. Like that was an opportunity, and like how he interacts and protects Rose's little brother, and like to me that was an added aspect of the horror, because he can be restrained, he can make decisions to interact normally, or to hit a switch and devour you. And it's like, that's terrifying, because how can you ever really be sure if you're safe with someone or not, because they are capable of doing that, which is what serial killers are, and hence why they're terrifying.
They say it. What is it that they say at the convention? It's like no working or something like that, or
No collecting at the
yes,
conference.
and they fashion themselves as collectors. That's the other like element. Or that it's just a misunderstood hobby.
Misunderstood. I think, yeah, misunderstood.
I almost totally forgot about the end of that episode of when everybody when Dream he pulls back the curtain, or he makes them sort of reckon with their own choices, and then they all have existential crises.
Yeah.
Which is again like another like kind of terror. Like it was horrifying in a way, like when everybody leaves the hotel and just everything everyone does.
Which I think was also, I was questioning still, kind of like what had Corinthians' original purpose been, even if it had been corrupted to some extent or gone awry.
Mm-hmm.
Is that not only did he inspire these people to behave this way, but he made them blind to the fact that like what they were doing was truly horrible. So that like it was supposed to be a mirror, but it wasn't a true reflection of their
Yeah.
behavior.
Interesting.
It's religious-esque, right? His following has a religious sort of overtone.
Right.
I mean, it's almost like he's a nightmare who has the power to give nightmares, right? But he's making these people, the protagonist of their own
Yeah.
nightmare. They're the ones in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the ones that are essentially giving nightmares to other people. And when Dream comes along, he takes that power away.
Yeah. Which, like, maybe is not like the best answer to that conundrum, right? It's like, yes, these people were doing horrible things, but they were also like within a nightmare themselves. And so it's like where we show that forgiveness, and like when Dream is coming to his like forgiveness realization, I think is also a question there. That's
I just want to like rewatch the show now.
I know.
Even though
Now
I've
I'm like,
watched it not that-
oh.
Yeah.
I watched it like not that long ago.
I watched it while I was sick, and I'm like, well, I have all this time now, and
Yeah.
gotta get it done.
Okay, I had some other just like little fun fact things, but does anyone have any other characters we haven't really we haven't really talked too much about, like Fiddler's Green or Rose. I don't really have much to say about it. There's just Stephen Fry in a very peak Stephen Fry performance.
It was perfect. It was exactly what I wanted from Fiddler's Green. It was so perfect.
I loved the house of characters too, and
Yes.
like when the Raven Matthew is sent out to be like, all right, just look for something weird that like seems off, and that whole kind of scenario of like going out with this this house full of characters and going to a drag show and then coming out and like about to be mugged, but then this guy in a bowler hat shows up and saves you, and it's like it played off so like this is so dreamlike, and yet it's like also a perfectly plausible
Mm-hmm.
occurrence of events. But I like that for Matthew. Is like, yeah, this was weird.
Another like minor shout out, just in terms of like a stacked cast, sort of tangentially related, but the God, I forget his name, the Pumpkinhead guy.
Oh yeah.
That's Mark Hamill.
Mervyn.
Mhm.
Mervyn. Yep.
Mark
That's-
Hamill. Oh,
Yeah,
I could
that's Luke
definitely see him
Skywalker.
being on this. Yeah.
Gosh, of course it is. Incredible.
And he has like 6 lines, I feel like.
Yeah, Mark Hamill is such an incredible voice actor, though.
Mhm.
So good.
And if we want the DC connection, there's another one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
He does all the
Yeah.
Joker stuff.
Absolutely.
Well, not all of it, but a lot of it.
So much of it.
Speaking of the bizarre, the one sort of story I've held off now, it's almost an hour 20 minutes, but the one story I really, really wanted to kind of talk about a little bit is the Sandman that almost was, where there were all sorts of different pitches going out for Adam. You know, people have been talking about adapting it for forever. One of the ones that sort of almost came to fruition, there's like so many dimensions to the story, I don't know where to start, but there was going to be a version of so I don't know if anyone's familiar with the character of John Peters, who's just kind of this like insane Hollywood producer. Not that he's insane, just like everything about his life's insane, because he started out as Barbara Streisand's hairdresser and then became a producer.
So would you call him Barbara Streisand?
Can you take a minute?
I'll leave now.
That was the best joke. Kira just won the podcast. So anyways, he had a contract with Sony, I think, and then he moved over to Warner Brothers, or Sony let him go to Warner Brothers, but he was technically like, there was a breach of contract, so it actually meant Sony had to pay Warner Brothers like some exorbitant sum, like a couple $1 million or something like that. So Warner Brothers was so happy that they, in acquiring this producer, they got a bunch of like free money. They said to John Peters, like, you can produce any three things, like any three IPs of your choice, and he picks the IPs that he picks are Superman, the Wild Wild West, and Sandman. And supposedly he picks the Sandman because he like saw a sculpture or a drawing of Morpheus and he thought it was cool. And so a script goes out for the Sandman, and it's like, it sounds bonkers, where it's like there's like a race, like a bunch of the characters are like sibling, like Dream and the Corinthian and someone else are siblings, and they're all racing to get all three of Dream's things by like the turn of the millennia. Otherwise, and then if they do, they like win the contest, and it's all this like weird stuff. And then Neil Gaiman basically in this interview, he's saying like, I try to be really nice about this kind of stuff, but like, someone came up and was like, well, what'd you think of the script? He's like, I thought it was horrible. It was the worst. And he says like, it was the worst script I had ever read. It was so bad. And there was a part that involved giant mechanical spiders, which is a thing if you're familiar with John Peters.
Wild West.
So like,
yes.
Alternatively,
yes.
There's a story in this like other sort of dimension. There's a story that Kevin Smith tells, where he was tapped to potentially write a script for Superman. This would have been the Superman produced by John Peters. And Kevin Smith, there's like a long version. You can watch the whole like story. It's quite funny the way he tells it, but he's describing how like he writes this Superman script, or he gets a bad Superman script. He thinks it's horrible. He tells the powers that be that he thinks it's horrible, and then gets it so he can write his own script. And then it goes along far enough that he meets with John Peters to discuss this potential Superman movie. And John Peters has like 3 stipulations that he wants from the Superman movie. One is no cape. Superman can't have a cape. The other one is no flying. So Superman can't have a cape and he can't fly. And Kevin Smith is like, all right, interesting. Kind of puts me in a box for Superman, but like, all right. And the third thing is that Superman has to fight a giant spider in the third act. And I'm just like, tell me about the spider thing. And supposedly John Peters goes like, well, like, spiders are the deadliest predator in the war. Like, he just is obsessed with spiders. So he tried to push the spider thing for Superman. He tried to push the spider thing for Sandman. And then eventually he got Wild Wild West, and lo and behold, in the third act, a giant mechanical spider shows up.
Yep.
So I had to just get that story out, because I'm just kind of, because when I learned about this aspect of Sandman, I was like, it's that John Peters, the giant spider guy.
John Spider Guy.
Oh, and I also forgot, part of the reason that project got shuttered also because Neil Gaiman leaked the script to Ain't It Cool News. And he was just like, yeah, like, it's so bad, like almost like the world needs to know.
Alternatively, with this Sandman, I know like one of the big things that happened with the comics was Lucifer was such a cool character that like once Lucifer pieces out from the Sandman storyline, he gets his own. And I'm like, I would love for a Gwendolyn Christie Lucifer adventure on just their
that
own.
adventure happened already. It's the Netflix series Lucifer, the 26th.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Also very, very good.
Yeah. That is true. I might just have to switch it up.
Yeah, it's Tom Ellis as Lucifer. So
I haven't seen. You recommend?
Yes, I love it. Very much like tall, dark, and handsome sort of stereotype,
Love
but
it. Okay.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean everyone's supremely hot in the show. It is one of
Beautiful.
those shows.
It's a good reason to
But-
watch any show.
Can't just be for
Yeah, I
high
mean
school
the character
shows.
development and like kind of the interpersonal relationship between like Lucifer and his angel siblings, and eventually God shows up. And of course, Lucifer, he's moved to LA. He owns a nightclub.
Of course he does. Of course.
Yeah. But then he joins the police force as a murder case consultant because he's super into punishing people.
Naturally.
So he wants to catch criminals. But he can't get past his own ego. So like every single case ends up being like this moral reckoning for him. And he goes into therapy, which is amazing. So yeah, I don't want to spoil like any more, but I would definitely recommend you watch it. It's a great show. I also think that's why they brought Mazikeen in to Sandman.
Oh,
She doesn't
yeah.
show up in the graphic novel, but she's like the only other one there. And of course, she's a really big character in the Lucifer Netflix show. Different actress, but same character though.
And I would love for is it Joanna
Joanna
Constantine. It's like, can we get more of her, please? I'm totally okay with this gender bend of Constantine, and I want
Her
more.
Latin was so good.
It was so wonderful. It was so much fun.
Constantine's such an interesting character too, in just terms of like the various lives. I mean, lest we all forget the Keanu Reeves Constantine.
Yes, of course.
We will, because I
love
don't
that
remember.
movie.
Is
that
it
might
good?
be getting a sequel.
Oh.
Okay.
And he shows up in, I want to say the Arrow or the Flash, like those series. Like there's a John Constantine in
Yep.
those.
Mhm.
That's a little more sort of like kind of like the OG Constantine, where he's like the blonde, chain smoking.
I'm reading a webcomic one where Zatanna and him both end up in London, England, but it's during the height of the Jack the Ripper murders.
Ooh.
And I'm
Can you
enjoying
send
that
that to me?
immensely.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's on Webtoons. So
Okay.
We mentioned Etrigan, another great DC character, but the Swamp Thing run by Alan Moore. There's 2 volumes, I think, but Alan Moore's Swamp Thing is excellent, and Constantine shows up in that, as does Etrigan.
Cool.
Swamp Thing's great. I'm very pro Swamp Thing.
he was also in Harley Quinn recently, right?
Mm-hmm. Not to spoil too much, but you find out that Swamp Thing is not a man who turned into plants. He is plants that assumed the consciousness of a man.
I love it. I love it.
All of this to say is that DC is killing it everywhere except for the films, where they like maybe once in a while squeak out a good one.
And it's always like the weird exception. It's like there's like the first Wonder Woman, and the Shazam is not bad, and
I enjoyed Shazam.
I like Shazam.
Aquaman. I know people liked it. I wasn't crazy about it, but Aquaman had some success. I don't know. But then there's other ones, like there's like a Black Adam movie that I'm looking at.
That
like, this-
looked. I mean, I do love Dwayne the Rock Johnson.
I will watch The Rock in anything,
Yeah.
frankly.
Fun fact: I am technically the Rock's Latin teacher.
Oh,
Do
sweet.
tell.
Tell me more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you all have like seen a movie called Red Notice on Netflix.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was
they
like
were-
maybe the most popular movie or something for like a minute. I haven't seen it, but it's
Yeah,
out.
I did
they were
watch it.
supposed to have an entire Latin scene in there, and they hired me to do the Latin for it.
Oh my
cool.
gosh.
Yeah, so I've done a couple different projects, but they brought me on for that one because I had also done Conjuring 3, and there was supposed to be the yacht scene at the end where Gal Gadot and The Rock are in the Mediterranean or something, and they're making out, and then Ryan Reynolds shows up, and The Rock and Gal start having this conversation in classical Latin
Oh,
about
cool.
like robbing a bank and heist.
Oh my gosh.
And they had to cut it because the filming was so far behind. Like I got there at 9 a.m. and we were supposed to start filming like maybe around 1 o'clock, and I left at 10 and they hadn't even started yet.
Oh
So
my
at that point they were just
gosh.
like, we got to cut this, we'll just do it in English.
Mhm.
So
Wow.
yeah, but I had made recordings of the Latin translation and sent it to production, who sent it to Dwayne. So technically I am his Latin teacher.
Claim
Oh,
to
cool.
fame is we've named a rock after him in our dig in Gotchabecchia.
Oh, that's great.
You didn't get the moment to like to The Rock's face be like, it's Salway, not Salve or something.
Unfortunately, I didn't get to meet him. They stuck me in the production office all day. It was COVID protocol, so
Sure.
Yeah.
I was basically
Yeah.
in there until he called for me, and he didn't want to run through stuff in his trailer. But I know for a fact that he got the recordings. So
Nice.
Amazing.
That's pretty cool.
yeah.
That is really
Any chance
cool.
you did the Loki for the TV show when they had to go to Pompeii?
Oh, that was Katrina Dixon actually
Okay.
at Emory. Although I did work with her and Cassandra Casillas on WandaVision.
Nice.
So, yep, it's the benefit of
So
living in
cool.
Atlanta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
Totally.
man. No kidding.
Yeah.
That's so much fun. Now I'm just thinking about all the Latin that I've like seen in a movie recently.
The one we keep coming back to, Eli and I, our favorite is in 13th Warrior.
Yes. So
Love
good.
that movie.
I just remember like Rex Mortuus Est or something
Yes.
like that. It's like,
Well, because they start in Greek, right? And then
Yeah.
they're like, okay, wait,
yeah,
no.
hegemona. And I just remember he used to go around and say, like, where is your meter?
Hegemona. Yeah.
So this is a good, actually, I think a note to maybe we can close off on. So Kira, we'll start with you, but do you have a favorite on-screen depiction of Latin?
I can't think of one really. I mean, there's some that I like just because they're really front and center. I like the Latin inscription in I think it's the second Wonder Woman movie. Actually, no, I take that back. I do have a favorite one. Yeah, it's in Velocipaster.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
the Catholic Mass in Latin in Velocipaster is so bad, and it's purposefully bad, but it hits that note really well, and then it like segues into the car crash with car crash VFX printed all over the screen, and yeah, if you haven't seen that movie, highly recommend it.
Not to give away too much, but it's about a pastor who is a velociraptor.
Yeah, he is a pastor. He gets cursed to turn into a velociraptor, and there are ninjas involved.
Of course.
Yeah.
I think the creator, their next movie is Outback Dracula.
Yep. Yeah, it's kind of a sequel, kind of not, but Brendan Steer he's fabulous. He's a genius. Yeah.
Christine, Eli, any most or least favorite Latin?
I mean, I didn't study the languages to the extent that you all did, but like I have a favorite. I've shown it to Lige, where it's a TV show called Greek, and it's all about actually fraternities and sororities at a college. But one of my favorite characters named Cappy, it's like this character who never graduates, and he like always majors, like he changes his major all the time, and he gets into a Latin off with some guy at the bar. He's like, "Oh, I once was a Latin major," and they just start quoting Latin at each other. I imagine very poorly, but I kind of.
I mean, they were just quoting, so it's like the quotes were fine, but it was funny. Yeah.
It's like that scene in Tombstone where they're basically just spouting off like idioms or like little phrases at each
and
other.
Like Cappy wins by doing what if a woodchuck could chuck wood, whatever, but in Latin. And I'm like, well, that seemed impressive. I don't know if that was correct, but it seemed impressive.
I remember, like, one of my very favorites, of course, as like a Latin teacher, and like that I remember from being a Latin student, is The Life of Brian, when he paints the graffiti. Romans go home.
When I was at, did I send you this picture? When I was at Masada, if you go down to one of the cisterns, someone has written Romanes
You
Eos
did
Domus.
not send me this picture, and please send me this picture immediately.
I'll send you this picture right now.
I mean, that's just such a classic. But I also remember in that same class where I first talked about that graffiti like in a grammatical setting, which was so much fun. They played like a Mr. Bean clip of Mr. Bean at Hadrian's Wall, like just speaking Latin. And I found it a few times before, but I don't really know like what it's from or where it is, but it's just delightful and very silly and so great. And I have a very random third one, is that in the TV show 30 Rock, Kenneth occasionally just like says a sentence in Latin.
Well, Kenneth is immortal, as we all know.
Yes, no, he's like an immortal time being, and he just like starts speaking Latin one day, and it makes me smile every time.
I already said mine. I think mine's from the 13th Warrior, where they have a whole. My metric is basically like if I can understand it, then that's A+ for And that's one where I actually like, oh, I actually know what they're saying.
Romanes eunt domus.
Oh, okay. I think we're hitting the
Yeah.
zone. Is there any other final remarks, thoughts they need to get out there before we put an end to this
I'm
dream?
excited for season 2 and where Lucifer,
Yes.
what's coming with Lucifer.
It's coming with everyone. Yeah. I hope we see a lot of returning characters.
Yeah.
Just excited for more vibes. All the
Yeah.
vibes.
Mm-hmm.
Of all the monsters in the entire series, the man who threw a sack full of kittens in water was by far the worst.
Nope.
No
Bleak.
redemption for that man.
Nope.
Eternal
Nope.
nightmares.
Nope.
Yeah.
Eternal nightmares. 100%.
Mhm.
Nope.
All right.
On
In
that
that case,
note.
on that note,
Like the worst
Let's all go
way
hug
to
our cats.
end this. Ah. Yeah,
damn
let's
it,
all
Christy.
go
I'm
hug
sorry.
our little fur babies.
Where my
Mine
cat
are
go?
passed out already, so.
So yeah, on that note, again, Kira, thank you so much for joining us. If people want to find you on the internet or social media or anything like that, where can they do that?
Yeah, they can find me on Twitter at Flavian Sophist. And yeah, I'd also like to mention edited volume that just came out, Women in Classical Video Games. I have a chapter on Hades by Supergiant in there. And there's
we have a lot of thought. Like, I love Hades.
oh my gosh, we should talk sometime. I love it so much. But yeah, just dropped, so it's hot off the press. A lot of really, really good articles on games in there.
Good stuff.
All right. And again, yeah, thank you so much. As usual, you can find us at movieswedig.com or follow us on social media at Dig Movies. Our podcasts are available on Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the major stuff. As we get into this sort of new season, we are going to be trying new things and including a sort of not a limited series, but a sort of special episode series we are tentatively titling Extremely Strained and Incredibly Forced, where our guests sort of pitch different classical reception interpretations to us. And so we're going to be coming back next week with one of those with a returning guest, Ayelet Heinzen-Lushkov. In the meantime, thank you all for listening and, like, review, recommend us. All right. Thank you, everyone, and bye.
Bye.
Bye.